Welcome to the Dapr community call, the first one for 2021. Thank you for joining. And I hope if you took some time off during the holidays, everybody had some good rest. Hopefully you saw before the holidays, there was a second release candidate for Dapr version 1.0, and hopefully you got a chance to use it or are planning to do so soon. We'd love to get the feedback, and we can get more into that at the discussion stage. But today we got a few interesting topics coming up. Yaron's going to talk about using Dapr without Helm. We're going to have Robert kind of introduce us to the new PHP SDK, which is very exciting, new exciting addition to Dapr. And Ryan is going to demo and talk about Dotnet SDK and using HTTP client in there. So lots of good stuff. As always, feel free to ask questions as we go through these topics in the chat. We'll try to address them during the discussion, or maybe even if we don't have time at the end. And hopefully we'll have enough time to also just talk about anything you want to talk about at the end of the call. So without any more time, let's kick it over to Yaron.
Okay, thank you, Ori. Let me just share my screen. And you will let me know when you can see it.
Yep. Yes, we see your screen.
Right, great. So today we'll be taking a look at how you can do kubeops, a fancy buzzword, or just Kubernetes operations without Helm, or like how I like to call it, being a Star Wars fan, the tragedy of Darth Helm the Wise. And just a brief overview of what Helm is, you probably know it. It's a CNCF project, came out in 2016. It's the sort of like the de facto package manager and template engine for Kubernetes today for Kubernetes resources. It's mostly used by ops and DevOps people, less so by developers to package applications together. And when I say applications, I mean all sorts of Kubernetes manifests that make up your applications. So this can be a deployment or a secret or a configuration map that your application reads, or custom resource definitions if you're running an application that targets the Kubernetes APIs. And Helm really helps you version and package those and deploy them to your cluster, and then manage the releases. And it calls your packages charts. And then Helm is client-side only. It didn't always used to be just client-side. It used to have a server-side aspect called Tailor, but that was very controversial. Not a lot of people like that. So version 3 of Helm came out with client-side only. It dropped the server-side support, but unfortunately it had a bunch of major breaking changes to it. And it basically caused almost every Helm chart in existence to be needed to have a complete rewrite from scratch, which was kind of unfortunate. So my personal take is that Helm is a good package manager, considering the other options out there, but you need to make sure that you really need it, and needs are very subjective. If you're doing very specific stuff, like not deploying applications, for example, but maybe managing a few installations for supporting infrastructure, you might not necessarily need Helm. And there's a bunch of gotchas with Helm, and I just want to go over a few of them. Some stuff that makes it a challenge to really keep Helm charts maintained and working with CRDs especially is this thing. So Helm can upgrade every Kubernetes resource that's available. Kubernetes has hundreds of resources, except for one. There is one resource that Kubernetes cannot upgrade. That Helm cannot upgrade, and that's CRDs. If you really want to take a look into that, be my guest. It's a pretty long read. If you Google up Helm CRD support, you'll see it's an open issue. Lots of controversy around that, but the end result is that Helm in version 3 cannot automatically upgrade CRDs. as CRDs, which are custom resource definitions in Kubernetes, are becoming more and more mainstream, and they're being used not only by operators from companies that operate specific systems that are built on top of those, but also by application developers. It's becoming a real problem to keep your charts when you're using Helm to deploy your application. But when you actually want to upgrade your CRDs, you need to fall back into manual YAML editing and kubectl operations and stuff like that. So that's a real pain. The other weird thing that we've suffered or are suffering, with Dapr, but this is not a Dapr issue by any means. Let's take a look at how you install Redis, for example, with Helm. This is a Helm command that basically just installs the Redis chart into our cluster. And one of the outcomes of that install is that the Redis chart will create a secret that holds this Redis password here. And our applications might be using the Redis password. And so if we were to upgrade the chart, let's say we want to upgrade because we're using a new Redis version or a new version of the chart came along with new configuration options. And we actually don't want to override the password and have Helm regenerated. That sounds like something pretty simple, right? So here are a few commands. Tell me which command you think will keep our secret in place and not override it. So we have Helm install -replace. We have Helm upgrade -reuse values. That looks promising. We have just the default Helm upgrade Redis, which, we don't know what this does unless we look it up, see what the default is. And we have reset values. So the answer is that none of them will actually keep our secret in place. Whatever upgrade command we will use, Helm will delete the secret and regenerate a new one without the ability to keep it. The way to tell Helm to keep the secret is to actually not be able to rely on the URL repository for the chart anymore. We need to download the YAML files, edit them manually, and add this nice Helm sh resource policy keep here. But that has its own set of issues. It'll create what Helm refers to as an orphan resource. And when you do try to upgrade Helm afterwards, you will get resource conflict error messages. And if you try to use Helm install, it'll give you very cryptic error messages. So that comes with its own set of problems. That's just a few of the issues that are existing with Helm. And I hope the Helm community will solve those as we go forward. So the upgrade process for Dapr today is, I don't know if you've seen our docs, we have it listed out, but basically just to sum it up, you start by using the Dapr CLI or kubectl to export your certificates, because Dapr uses TLS certificates and we don't want Helm to blast those when we upgrade. We basically need to save them and we need to give them to Helm when we do the upgrade process. And that ends up with a really, really long CLI command. So the first thing to do is use kubectl. If it's kubectl, it's a little longer. You do kubectl get secrets, and then you need to take the different fields and copy and paste them into files and save those files somewhere. In the Dapr CLI, we actually have a dedicated command for that. It's called Dapr mtls export, and that'll just automatically save your certificates for you. So you've used the Dapr CLI or kubectl here, and now you need to jump over to Helm. So you need to make sure that Helm's installed, you need to install it, have the CLI on your machine, make sure it's version 3. And then you need to use the Helm CLI to check for the release name, because Helm uses release names to track charts, and the namespace under which it is installed in. Then you're going to need to use the Helm CLI to update the repositories manually using Helm repo update. And finally, you get the Helm upgrade command, which is quite long. I'll show it in a sec, where you supply the certificates that you got. And that's going to look something like this beautiful thing here. And so it's quite a process. But what's upcoming in the new Dapr CLI, and I'm going to show a demo of that now, is basically a zero downtime upgrade with a single command. And that really goes to complement the Dapr init-k command today, which can have a bunch of options for it, like enabling HA mode, disabling or enabling MTLS. And then there's another nice feature that we're going to introduce inside the Dapr CLI. So let's see how that works. I hope you can see my CLI. Let me zoom in a bit. All right. So I don't have Dapr installed right now. I can do Dapr status -K, and I see that Dapr is not initialized. And what I'm going to do now is basically just install Dapr, and I'm telling Dapr, hey, install version 1.0 release candidate 1 into my Kubernetes cluster. And what this is going to do is basically just take the Helm chart and install it without Helm. So I don't need to have Helm on my machine. I don't need to have anything. This will just install Dapr into my Kubernetes namespace. You can also supply the namespace that you want to install this into. By default, it installs into Dapr system, which is also the default for our Helm chart. And there is a bunch of options that you can give the Dapr init command. And now Dapr should be installed. So if we do Dapr status -K again, we can see that the control plane is already running with RC version 1. Now, instead of doing the extremely complicated Dapr upgrade command, if I want to upgrade to the RC2 version, all I need to do now is call Dapr upgrade and give it the RC2 version. So we'll be running that. And what this does is it does all the certificate exporting for you, the patching of the resources, and it'll keep HA modes in place. It'll detect which values were already supplied, and some stuff will not get blasted over from the beginning. Things are crucial to the Dapr system namespace, like configurations and stuff. And it'll do all that on your behalf. And after which, the only thing you'll need to do is restart your deployments, and the new version of the control plane will get picked up. So that's it. And if I do Dapr status -K again, we can see that the control plane is running, and we've now upgraded to RC2. And this is essentially all you need to upgrade the Dapr control plane. Now, some of you might be saying, hey, you know, this is nice. This looks really cool, but Helm has a bunch of options. So, you know, if you look at our Helm chart configuration, there's a bunch of options that you can set on the Helm chart. What if I need any one of those, right? What if I want to set the log level on one of the control planes? Or what if I actually do want to give new certificates for the upgrade process? So I'm really happy to say that the Dapr CLI that's going to come out supports and will support every Helm configuration by default. So you can just do --set and use all the Helm configurations here without actually using Helm. So let's say that we have the RC2 installed now, and yeah, that's wrong namespace. And we're taking a look at our operator log. So let's take a look at the log here. And we actually decide that, hey, you know what? This is too verbose. I want to change the log level of the operator to error debug or something else. So you will be able to do Dapr upgrade, and do a --set with the Helm command, with the Helm argument that you would give the chart, and the CLI will just apply it. So let's do that. And what's going to happen now is an in-place patching that the CLI is going to do only for the Dapr operator. So there is no regular Helm upgrade process here. Your resources will stay in place. The other pods will not restart. Everything will just stay. The only thing that'll happen, that should happen, and we're going to verify that, is that the operator has restarted. So if we take a look at the Dapr namespace again, we can see that only the operator restarted itself. And if we take a look at the logs here, we can see that we're getting the log level that we requested. So you can now use the Dapr CLI to both install and upgrade Dapr without using Helm or resorting to Helm, but you get all of the goodies that the Helm chart gives you in terms of configurations. So is this a complete replacement for Helm? Maybe. Time will tell, I guess. And more importantly, the people using Dapr will tell. So if you think there's anything else that we can add to the CLI to make it more user-friendly or ops-friendly really in Kubernetes environments, please let us know. We have the CLI repository. Feel free to open an issue. Yeah, and thank you. This is the end of the demo.
Thank you, Yaron. Thanks for that demo. It's really cool. Zero downtime updates are always an important thing, especially when you're thinking of production scenarios, of course. So we're happy to see that coming towards version 1.0. I don't see any questions in the chat, so let's move along. Robert, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Ori. Give me a sec here to figure out screen sharing. Should be pretty quick. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the Dapr PHP SDK, some of the background behind it, and show you what an actor looks like in PHP. I'm Rob, and I've been programming professionally since 2005 and working with PHP almost exclusively since 2013. Today I work at Automatic on the decision science team, working with PHP, Python, JavaScript, and Scala. So why a PHP SDK? Well, PHP runs almost 80% of the web. That means there's a good chance there's some PHP running somewhere in your organization, most likely a content management system. But if you needed to, you can actually interface your content management system with Dapr to do some really fascinating things. Also, you might be maintaining some legacy PHP application that you'd like to migrate to microservices. The biggest risk before Dapr was that you'd also have to rewrite it into some other language to create the microservices. Now you don't have to rewrite anything and can migrate first, rewrite later as needed. Another potential case is to use something like Laravel to expose your public REST API that consumes Dapr services, or just write everything in PHP and take over the world. So what does an actor look like in PHP? So I'm going to show you a basic bank account actor implementation in PHP. And the first thing that you normally do when creating an actor probably is define the state. And we do that using just a plain old PHP class that extends this actor state class. And we can just see it has a simple balance with an integer type and a default of 0. Next, we define the interface, which our bank account will do very simple things, getting the balance, withdrawing in pennies, and deposit in pennies, which is all in integers. Importantly, we have an attribute here that says, hey, it's going to be a bank account. And we use that when basically getting an actor proxy back from Dapr. We'd say, hey, this is the Dapr type that I have that implements this interface. The implementation is a bit more complicated, but it's essentially just a regular PHP class that implements a couple of interfaces. One is the one that we defined earlier. And then we also have the iActor interface. And if you're not familiar with PHP, you probably may or may not have heard of traits. And it's basically behavior that isn't attached to any concrete class. And we attach it to a concrete class using this use statement inside of a class. So we have an actor trait basically that implements most of iActor. The constructor is pretty simple. We take an ID and we take our state that we want. And that gets automatically injected into the class. And then we can kind of just basically get the balance. We just return the state balance. Withdraw, we try to withdraw. If it fails because there's not enough money, then we just roll back the transaction and throw an exception. And deposit is also very the reverse of withdrawal with no error. Unit testing is also pretty straightforward. We use an anonymous class to basically inject a trait here that allows us to kind of mock out all the API calls that the base class would try to do. And it's pretty straightforward. And then finally, using an actor, which may or may not be defined in PHP itself, it could be in some other language. All you need to do is have the interface here and say, hey, give me the actor, and then call the actor as though it were local. And any questions? Went through that really quick.
Not seeing any questions. but
I have a question. So are all the Dapr APIs covered in the PHP SDK? And
Yes.
if not, which ones aren't?
Yes. I'm 99% sure that I've got all of them. I haven't done a recent review of the latest RC, but as far as I know, every single API is cuss. Yes, I have tested cross-language calls for actors, and it works just fantastically. There was an open PR for the distributed calculator that implemented the percent function, but I've closed that PR for now.
Well, just maybe that's a good point you're making. The PHP SDK is now a new repo in the Dapr organization, so everybody can check it out if you haven't seen it. And Robert is the maintainer of that repo, as the person who basically contributed the code.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Dapr maintainer.
I
well.
missed Richard, I'm sorry I missed your question, asking if it's a bit dated. And I would say it's an interesting language that has really grown a lot, especially in the last couple of years, and modernized quite a bit. As someone who also uses C# for like a lot of personal projects, I would say that PHP, there are some problems that are much more elegantly solved in PHP than in any other language I've ever used. And that's sounds a little ridiculous, but not to get into the weeds too much, but PHP has a very strange implementation of a hash map that are basically arrays, and they're you can do some really interesting and elegant things with them if you abuse them. It's pretty awesome.
I try something out next. There's some samples you can point them to in the repo.
Yes, there is an open PR right now in the repo for an actor example, and there will be more examples coming soon. It's my next task that I have to work on. So
Rob, you know, a lot of content management systems are written in PHP, like Joomla. So do you see like Dapr plugins for those systems that use the SDK to give higher level capabilities of Dapr inside of these CMS systems?
Absolutely. Yes, I was actually, while working on this presentation, kind of thinking through some really interesting possibilities for using a CMS. One would be able to use Dapr to interact with these systems internally as from a microservice perspective. So for example, you might have a blog that's running Joomla or WordPress or Drupal, and basically say, hey, I want to, I want my health updates from my microservices to post on a status page, for example. You could automate that very easily, or even have like updates to a blog post or a website that go through and handle certain things. You could use something like WooCommerce to run a web shop, for example. And when an order, have Dapr processing the orders or subscriptions or whatnot, and then having those two systems being able to communicate very seamlessly. That could be really cool.
Yeah, that looks really cool.
Great. Great discussion there. Thank you, Robert. I'm sure people will discover this and start trying it out. And yeah, I think it's exciting to have another SDK for Dapr. So thank you for that. Yep. And with that, Ryan, feel free to start sharing and take it away. You are still muted, Ryan.
Goodness, that's so unprofessional of me. Hey, everybody. So before I share my screen real quick, the thing I'm going to show some examples today of basically using the .NET, C#, however you want to think about it, standard library HTTP client for interacting with Dapr, and in particular, interacting with Dapr service invocation. And I think even if you're not a .NET user or somebody who's, this is relevant to, there might be implications for other sort of language SDKs. The realization that I had as the maintainer of the .NET SDK is basically, there's a set of SDKs out there, or a set of languages and platforms where it's really natural to just interact with Dapr over HTTP. Like a lot of our Node examples for Dapr just make an HTTP call using a Node HTTP library. But we're sort of pushing people down this path for Java and .NET, where Dapr is almost like Dapr for service invocation, I should say, is almost like a wrapper library. It's almost like a wrapper library around that underlying GRPC or HTTP client functionality. And so the point of this was basically me wondering, well, how could we have a little bit more of a cohesive experience with this, and also allow people to leverage a lot of the libraries they might already be using, or the code that they already have, where adopting Dapr and adopting Dapr service invocation feels like really, really incremental to add it to a system. So I've got a really simple little client here. This is just kind of like a console app. And I've got an MVC controller here. And there's nothing Dapr about any of this code other than I'm using some state storage, and there is some pub sub enablement here. And I've just got these like routes. So if you're not a C# or you're not a .NET person, the only thing you really need to take away is this is my server-side application, and I'm handling like these kinds of routes, right? But I'm really talking about the client today. So if I were going to interact with this application without Dapr, what I might do is something like this. I might create an HTTP client. I would have to then figure out what URL to use. We call that service discovery. I would then use this HTTP client, and I can use functionality that's just on this client class. So like these methods here for working with JSON were added in .NET 5. If you're using a different serializer, like say like Newtonsoft JSON written by my friend James, there's a similar family of extension methods on HTTP client that enable you to work with that serializer instead of the built-in one. So there's all this nice, really rich functionality on the .NET HTTP client that you can use to interact with this. And you'll notice that these URLs and these routes look a lot like the ones I wrote in the application because they're just the same, right? There's nothing in between. But what I'm not getting out of doing this is some of the benefits that Dapr adds. Because Dapr adds tracing, Dapr adds service discovery, excuse me. Dapr adds service discovery, basically being able to resolve a logical name to a real host name. And Dapr adds end-to-end encryption. And so I wouldn't have any of those benefits if I just wrote this code and that was the end of story. Coincidentally, I did a brief Twitter poll of the sort of .NET Twitter sphere last week. And I think I got about 70% responses from people saying, I just use the HTTP client for my cross microservices calls, versus about 30% of people who are using some other libraries. And there are some really cool libraries out there in .NET. But wouldn't it be really nice if I could have this just do Dapr without any changes? Well, that's sort of the idea that I'm playing with here. So I wrote a little message handler that basically allows me to use the built-in HTTP client with an app ID as the host name, and then everything else is the same. So all these URLs are as if I would have written them before Dapr. All of my interactions with HTTP client are as if I would have written them, before Dapr was involved in the picture. And this actually works really well because in a real practical project, in .NET especially, I probably have separated the code that creates and configures this client from the code that uses it. And it's kind of a 90-10 or an 80-20 rule. I probably have a lot of code that interacts with an HTTP client and probably have very few places in code where I set one up. So in terms of how this works, the really neat thing about this is, well, Dapr, this is the API documentation for service invocation, by the way. Dapr will sort of treat everything that comes after this method segment as a pass-through. Dapr treats the request body as a pass-through, and Dapr sort of treats the HTTP verb as a pass-through. So I can effectively, as long as I can rewrite the URLs that are coming out of my application into URLs that look like this, Dapr can sort of happily process them. So I'll jump over here to my console. I've already got my server running, and I'm just going to do, I've got 3 samples here. I've got one with HTTP client, I've got one with Dapr client, and I've got one using something like refit that I'll show off in a sec. So I'll just run this first one just to prove that this all works. And the really interesting thing that you're going to see coming through the logging here is this handler class that I've written is going to, well, I thought it did. I thought my handler class that I wrote would echo the URL, but it's not echoing the URL. But I do have tracing now. So This is the local zipkin running here. And I should have some tracing, and I don't. So what did I do? I did something wrong here. I thought this was working. Oh, you know what? I didn't save this file. That's why. Pretend that that didn't happen. So I'm going to run this again. So that's the result that you would see if you didn't use HTTP client, or you didn't use Dapr, for instance. The only tracing that I'm getting from Dapr is the state store. So you thought that was a mistake, but I'm just proving my point even harder. So this is going to run again, and you can see that these are being echoed by my message handler. So in the application code, you can see I wrote account 17 as if Dapr weren't in the picture, but the URL that it gets translated to is this. This is going to get bounced through the Dapr sidecar so that Dapr is aware of those calls, can apply its ACLs, can apply its tracing. And then you see that we've actually got tracing for the request here, including that get state call. So that's kind of cool. We can sort of tunnel these requests through Dapr. I want to bounce over to the refit example because that's a neater example, I think, of the kinds of things that people in the community are doing with HTTP client that this now sort of like enables us to do. So refit is kind of a cool example. And this is based on something else. I don't remember what other library it's based on. It's not a totally original idea. And I'm sure that there's something in Java. I think I've seen something in Spring that's similar. But basically the idea is that you describe an interface. So you describe an interface, you annotate that with the things that look like your routes, you annotate that with your data types and those sorts of things. And then you can either have this do automatic deserialization for you, or you can have this fall back to like the primitive sort of HTTP request response question thing. And then this is how I create it. So it's a little bit ugly to create this with refit, but you can see that it basically gives me one of these interfaces back. I get this iBank interface. And then I'm using the API that I defined on this interface to interact with that. I'll just run this guy also so you can see that and prove that it works. But it's all HTTP client under the covers, and it's all just rewriting these URLs to map from the URL space that you designed to the URL space that Dapr understands. And in a way, it's sort of like your code just calls your code, but with Dapr in the middle. So this has worked, and this has done all this kind of stuff. So anyway, I wanted to show this because I think it's something that maybe depending on which language community you're coming from, you might be like, well, duh, obviously I could do that. I'm planning to put, I'll show the code really quickly that sort of powers this. And it's basically HTTP client can have functionality injected that modify a request like on the way out is sort of how to think about it. So you create the request and then somebody else modifies it. So I am planning to add this to the .NET SDK in some form so that it's there, probably in a way that's a little bit easier to construct and a little bit easier to work with. It's also going to support the API token, which it doesn't support today. But I'm interested to see from folks, you know, I've got these samples and I'll drop the link in the chat so people can look at them. You know, I think the HTTP client class that's in .NET has already got a bit of an ecosystem around it. If you're a C# or a .NET programmer, chances are you already know it pretty well. If you don't know it pretty well, there's probably another library that you know pretty well. And it's probably going to continue to get more love in the next couple of years. So HTTP client as an API is probably one of the high investment points, and we're not going to be able to replicate all the features and all the investment that it has within the Dapr SDK. It's just not realistic and not beneficial. So I wanted to throw this out there. I wanted to, you know, talk about it in the broader context of .NET and see what folks' reactions to it are. And, you know, do you see something like this and it's really exciting? Do you see something like this and you say, ah, that's dumb? I'm really curious what reactions folks have. So I guess I'll open up for questions and see if anybody has any thoughts.
Yeah, looks like a lot of good sentiment in the chat. Carlos, you're mentioning how this might help with migration, which I think is an interesting point. Let me let you unmute. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure. Thanks. There's a bunch of applications that we have currently using HTTP client, and as Ryan stated, we use dependency injection, and we have like the clients defined in other places in code. So we should basically could go there, add the handler, and start working with Dapr almost without any change. And that will help a lot with with adoption and with migration paths to use Dapr in the future.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I think the goal here, if I had two goals with introducing this and sort of promoting it, I think the first goal is to make it so that migration's obviously one, but I think migration of knowledge is about as valuable as migration of code. Like from the point of view of choosing whether to adopt Dapr, there's virtually no trade-off, right? Like you had one line of code in your app, now you have one different line of code in your app. And you've got tracing, you've got end-to-end encryption, and you've got service discovery as a result of that one line of code. So there's basically no trade-off. It's going to have the same performance and the same same API set that you're used to. Cool. Anything else, Ori? You're the sort of moderator here.
Yeah. Richard writes, I see the HTTP is only for ingress from brownfield applications or egress to external applications. However, for new applications, gRPC would be my go-to.
Yeah. As sort of a North Star, I'd love for us to get to a place where the standard gRPC toolkit works really well for Dapr, and we're just not there. We're just not there. Like there's some ways that you can do some gRPC functionality with Dapr. The Dapr client uses, maybe Yaron can speak to this a little bit more. The Dapr client in .NET SDK and most of the SDKs uses gRPC, but that's a different flavor than gRPC in between your own applications for service invocation. Like I think the objective or the North Star should be the generated, platform independent or platform specific gRPC toolkits that everybody knows can just work on top of Dapr like this. Like it was one of the goals from the beginning that Dapr could work with existing server-side code or existing frameworks on the server side. This is basically the same idea, but on the client side. I'd love to see us get there with gRPC as well.
Yeah, today, if you're a gRPC developer and you write your application using gRPC, you have a Dapr product service, which your service needs to implement. And that sort of has like a method wrapper so that all calls to whatever gRPC method you have arrive at this one single point method. And then you can take the proto and translate it into your method of choice. That's not an ideal experience. So we will be looking at server-side reflection to basically be able to have you tell Dapr what your proto service is, and then Dapr could maybe masquerade or act on behalf of your service as a proxy, and you'll just be able to use, like Ryan said, whatever proto services that you use, and not need to adopt Dapr's proto service to get responses.
Oh, a couple of things. I've been using a library out of the web called, protobuf. It's a .NET protobuf that takes the interface files and generates the protobuf files for me. So I don't have to, I can just live in .NET.
Yep.
That's a bit lazy, I know, but it's I've been doing .NET for a long time and a fan of WCF way back when, except for all the knobs that it had. So living on interfaces alone and data contracts and service contracts using that library is pretty nice because it totally abstracts away the generation of the protobuf files. Yep. And two, when we have a service like an ASP.NET site running, how are we gonna, like, I still am confused about how does that ASP.NET website, maybe even using Blazor server side, not WASM, but Blazor server side, how's that gonna start using gRPC to talk directly into Dapr?
One of the really complicated things here with gRPC is actually HTTP2, and that's the main sort of complication. Is that's really the main sort of complication is maybe I could find a good link to share or something like that, and we could talk offline. But basically, unencrypted HTTP2 sort of requires all the consumers or all the people who are going to speak unencrypted HTTP2 to take a leap of faith. So the protocol version negotiation features in HTTP are based on TLS, And when you have no TLS, it requires everybody to agree on the version ahead of time, which is not good for serving public traffic and not good for serving basically traffic that you don't control. So that's one complication that I can see immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Not something, it's one more sort of concern to juggle, but it's not something that I can see as a long-term problem.
I'm doing a greenfield development, and what I'm having to do is do HTTP into my Dapr actors and then back that way. That's the only real way I could see from leveraging the ASP services approach.
Yeah, so I'm a little curious with that. With that example, you said you're doing HTTP into your actors. So you have an ASP.NET project hosting actors, and then you're serving some HTTP endpoints inside that project, and then inside of there, you're basically using HTTP as a proxy to interact with the actor system. Are you doing gRPC as an entry point, or are you doing like REST and JSON?
It's, well, because my Dapr actors, the way I understand it, and I could be wrong here because I'm just, getting into this all, but the ASP.NET website is serving up the web pages. And when I want to talk to an actor, I do an HTTP request to Dapr, and which routes down to the actor, rehydrates state, and comes back. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to use HTTP client from the website to the Dapr infrastructure. I just want to have gRPC across the board, right?
I mean, so one of the things, if you're interacting with actors, is you can use the actor client from outside of an actor. You don't have to be inside of an actor to use the actor client. So there's nothing stopping you. Like you don't technically need that other level. You might want it for some reason. I don't know exactly what you're building.
Well, one of my problems is Twilio comes out with a post, right? So I gotta handle that post.
So one of the things, this has come up a couple times, and I'll probably produce a sample for .NET. One of the things that people have asked me for a couple times is guidance about securing these sort of mixed mode sites. So if you have both, like say PubSub and serving public traffic in the same website, you really don't want your public traffic and your PubSub to get sort of mixed, or your public traffic and your actors to mix. And so you want a way to prevent public traffic from the internet from reaching PubSub endpoints and reaching your actors endpoints. So we'll probably do something there to try and make that really easy for people. Probably not within the next couple of weeks. Might be a sample within the next couple of weeks, but not built in. But that's another consideration to think about. You can sort of take those kinds of concerns off the board if you factor things into multiple projects. So maybe I have one website. I don't know what your factors are for decision making, but maybe you have one website that serves public traffic and uses the actor client to talk to an actor system that's running in a separate web app inside the enterprise or inside the cluster that's not accessible to public traffic, which makes your security model a little bit simpler. But definitely would be up to chat with you about this more if you want guidance, or you think there are things that we need to address on the .NET side.
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great.
I'd love to. I'd honestly I think at least for the .NET SDK, we're at this point where we've got good functionality. I'd love to see us post V1 address the amount of richness there, the amount of guidance, the amount of ways that we're sort of okay, here's what's really going to make you successful with Dapr. I'd love to see how we can put those things in the .NET SDK. Yeah,
my only criticism of Dapr to date is that I think it's falling into the path of WCF, where it's trying to do too much with too many people. It needs to pick a lane and live in it. And I understand that there's all these other languages that you want to interact with the protobuf side, but I think it's also, I worry that it's going to be one of those things where it gets too complicated, too many options, too many features, that it loses its real purpose of capabilities. And I think that's a lesson that, Microsoft, that's a very expensive lesson for dropping WCF. In my opinion.
Okay, sorry, I had some problems unmuting there. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for that discussion, everybody. Yeah, I guess we can open it up now to general questions or comments. Anything anybody wants to talk about, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you. I can just something that I did see pop up in the chat is the questions about the version 1.0 and production readiness. So just to kind of reiterate the message, we before the holidays, we released a second release candidate for version 1.0. We expect to release a third one by the end of this month. And you know, we're taking this really iterative and cautious approach to make sure Dapr is production ready for version 1.0. And we hopefully will be able to have an official release very, very soon after that. But again, the changes that are going into these release candidates are either issues that are, you know, from testing and trying out these release candidates are coming up, and also from users who are using Dapr in production and providing feedback on gaps or things that are missing, because we really want to make sure that in version 1.0 it's production ready, robust, and good to go. So all the stabilization, all those feedback, everything is being addressed towards that goal. So yeah, I don't know if Yaron or Mark, if you have any other comments on this.
Nothing in particular other than that we'd like to hear from as many Dapr users as possible about your experiences and what you're doing with Dapr.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if you want us to, we'd love to hear if you've been using Dapr in any production scenarios. I mean, we were sort of customers that we work with ourselves, but we'd love to hear about more if you're using it, and even help you promote it. You know, if you want, if you've actually taken Dapr close to production, and you know, you've built a project out of it, and you want us to put, you know, some logo on our website that you've been using it, we'd love to kind of find out more about what you're doing and kind of, you know, help promote you and things like that. So, you know, as we get to 1.0, the whole point of 1.0 is that it's production ready, and we'd love to hear your stories.
Yeah, and I think just jumping on that, also if we can also expand that storytelling and have you kind of be a guest in the blog, or if you want to demo something in community calls, feel free to reach out in Discord. We're always happy to get more this kind of content. You can reach out to me specifically also, or in Discord, and I'm happy to work with you. And whether it's something to post on our blog, or if you want to demo something in a community call, just interesting things you're doing, as Mark said, things in production that you're doing, very interesting to us, and we feel that's a lot of value to the community as a whole. So feel free to reach out. Okay, so with that, just last thing, Richard asking question on serialization work. So I'm not sure what you're referring to. Let me get you to unmute again, and you can elaborate.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. I was looking at the work, some of the GitHub issues going by on the serialization and the underlying serialization, and I saw the removal of the binary serialization. Is that correct? From the actor serialization, the actor state?
Yeah, so I can, this is Ryan, I can speak to that. So binary formatter in .NET, Richard, I can point you some links if you're interested. Binary formatter in .NET is a technology from like another generation that basically the problem with binary formatter is it's not a secure technology and it can't be made into a secure technology. It's a serialization technology where the client gets to specify what gets read in terms of what data types get instantiated and in terms of what data to put in them. And it's just plain not suitable for any sort of untrusted traffic ever. There's a bunch of well-known security work around this, presentations at DEF CONs, and there's actually an active plan from the .NET team to deprecate and remove binary formatter from .NET. So as of .NET 5, for instance, in a web project, if you create a new web project today and you try to use the binary serializer APIs, or binary formatter, I always get it wrong, it will actually throw an exception in a web project in .NET 5. It doesn't work by default because it's that serious of a problem that they're kill switching it and with a plan to deprecate and remove. So
I need to understand that more in terms of where that is. But the reason why I find the JSON serialization to be such a pain is that, you know, protected properties, private constructors, I just want to have an image, especially in an actor state. I just want to store the image and then bring it back without having to go through the gyration of what I call a JSON ORM process, where I got to take the stuff out of my class, make it serializable in another DTO just to serialize it down to JSON and then work it all the way back up again. It's especially in actors, it's the state of the actor that's inside the actor. So, I mean, unless there's a security hole there from being able to read the state out of the Dapr, wherever state's being stored, that's just my feedback. I need to understand exactly why binary serialization is such a security hole is where I'm at.
Sure. So, I mean, if you want to research it, the term to search for is serialization gadget chain or serialization gadget chain attack.
Gadget chain attack, is that what you said?
Yes, gadget chain. You heard me right. I'll post a link in the chat. But basically, when you're deserializing a binary formatter payload, any type that's reachable from your application is fair game for an attack to instantiate or set properties or call a constructor or call a finalizer. So it's something that the .NET team is basically trying to take out of .NET. I really don't want us to show up in a DEF CON presentation or something like that. Somebody saying, hey,
neither do I, especially my app.
Hey, did you know that this new technology is using this thing with all these nodes? So it's been the case that things like actor frameworks have used these kind of serialization technologies with the assumption that they would never see untrusted traffic. And I think the really problematic assumption that users know what it means to prevent untrusted traffic from reaching an application. Yet we're also talking about things like, well, I'm hosting actors and public traffic in the same website. So like, I don't think it's a good default assumption. I don't think it's a good default assumption for us to make that users of Dapr will be in a position to always prevent untrusted traffic from getting.
Okay.
It's not something that's good to do in 2020 or 2021.
Thanks. I'm going to research it just so I understand exactly where it is. I'm not saying that it isn't a problem, but I know I got to understand it so I can make sure
Okay. I'd also be happy to help, you know, if you want to talk about specific cases and how to make them better, I'm all ears as well.
Thanks very much.
So I see in the chat one more little discussion about overhead from about the sidecar communication. And Yaron, I saw you responded, but just to comment on that, we do have some performance numbers in the docs, and I think Yaron even published a dashboard where you can track the latest test for service invocation.
Yeah, I think what Ringo talked about was having multiple sidecars inside of the pod. And so, yeah, I know of a few people who are using, you know, multiple containers in general that have dependencies on one another, but also Dapr next to other sidecars. The case you gave, Ringo, with Google Cloud is interesting. I mean, you will see less of latency hit there because probably the traffic between Dapr and the SQL proxy will not be encrypted. But, you know, for example, if they're both written in Go, you might want to contribute this SQL proxy thing into Dapr itself so that Dapr can become the sidecar for the SQL proxy. We've seen that happen with OPA. So when you use OPA with Dapr, Dapr will actually host the open policy agent inside because they're both written in Go. So you can extend Dapr to basically include many components that you'd otherwise run as an additional sidecar.
Is there anything in the docs that describes how such an extension needs to be implemented?
Yes, so if you go to our, so we have a dedicated repository. It's called components contrib, or if you can drop the link here, it'd be useful. We have information there. Also, we have contributing docs inside of our docs.dapr.io website. And for anything that's not there you think should be there, feel free to contact us on Discord. us meaning the maintainers.
Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe that would be a good kind of refresh. If you can see my screen, some of the repos that we got. Of course, Dapr is the runtime, docs is the docs, but it's really recommended to just look at the docs in the official website. But components contrib, this is the repo that Jeroen just mentioned. That's where all the components go in, which are the different implementations and integrations with other technologies. So this would be it. I can paste that to the chat as well. So with that, thank you everyone for joining. I believe that's all the time we have. Hope you have a good 2021 and see you next time in the next community call. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.